Hello everyone, and welcome to the DNA Spaces 101 series, episode 2, DNA Spaces Connector Setup. My name is Jose Correa, a technical marketing engineer on the Enterprise Networking Wireless team, and today we will be discussing what the DNA Spaces Connector is and walking through setting up your own DNA Spaces instance using the DNA Spaces Connector. Well, today we have a pretty packed agenda with the DNA Spaces Connector topic. First, we'll be covering what the DNA Spaces connector is and why is it so important. Next, we'll be going through how to connect the DNA Spaces connector to the DNA Spaces cloud services. Then we'll be able to connect our wireless controller to DNA Spaces. And then after that, we'll be uploading our maps onto DNA Spaces and then adjusting our location hierarchy directly inside DNA Spaces. First, we'll talk about what the DNA Spaces connector is. So DNA Spaces connector allows the forwarding of client information from the wireless controller onto DNA Spaces cloud. With that information, a wide variety of features including analytics, reporting, and safety can be done based on location RSSI data. So here we have the DNA Spaces connector right in the middle, and that is connected to our wireless controller within that specific network. And with the DNA Spaces connector, the access point is able to communicate with DNA Spaces cloud. So the DNA Spaces connector is the middleman between our network and the DNA Spaces cloud. Now, before we start configuring our own network to DNA Spaces with our DNA Spaces connector, I wanted to show you guys the setup guide. This is on dnaspaces.cisco.com, and you can quickly run through it and use it to guide you to deploy whatever type of deployment you need to enable DNA Spaces. Now we're going to start here at the DNA Spaces dashboard and to our first step, which is to connect our DNA Spaces connector to DNA Spaces. Here on the dashboard, we can click the function menu on the top left, and then we click Setup and Wireless Networks. And then just a reminder that you can always go to dnaspaces.cisco.com in order to use the setup guide, and this will explain and walk you through every step regarding your specific deployment type. Here we're going to go click Get Started, and then we're going to choose our wireless network, which is our Cisco AirOS Catalyst. We currently have a Catalyst wireless controller within our specific network, and then we're going to go connect via DNA Spaces connector, but there's also other options like connecting to the wireless controller directly or tethering your existing CMX on-prem deployment. Then lastly, it's going to be telling you your prerequisites for the DNA Spaces connector. So the wireless controller version, and make sure you have an access to the virtual machine where you installed the DNA Spaces connector, and then also reachability to the internet. Then here we're going to continue our setup. And then after that, it will successfully save our configuration. After you go through the first initial setup, you're going to have to create a DNA Spaces connector. For the DNA Spaces connector, you have to create a new token. So a token must be generated for each DNA Spaces connector that you add to DNA Spaces, and this token is used to connect Cisco DNA Spaces with the DNA Spaces connector. So we'll just name this demo connector, and then we'll click Generate Token. This token is specific, so it enables the DNA Spaces to identify the specific DNA Spaces connector. And then we'll copy the token right here. Now that we've copied the DNA Spaces connector token, we'll be able to go into our DNA Spaces connector dashboard web UI. So then here we can configure our token by clicking Setup and then pasting our token that we received before. This will automatically configure the DNA Spaces connector. Also on this web UI, we can configure a proxy within the DNA Spaces connector if that's required for internet access. Alright, after the DNA Spaces connector is now connected to DNA Spaces, then we will add our wireless controllers. And in order to associate our wireless controllers to our DNA Spaces connector, we click here to add controllers. Then we'll choose our connector that we want to associate it with, which is our previous one called Demo Connector. Then we'll enter our IP address of our wireless controller, and then we can give it a controller name, so we'll just put wireless controller here. And then we'll choose the controller type. So here we have a Catalyst wireless controller. Now we'll enter our netconf username and password. And then we can test connectivity to make sure that it is able to reach our wireless controller. And so the connectivity is successful, and then you can save and close. And then after that, our wireless controller is added to our DNA Spaces and DNA Spaces connector. After that, we have to set up our location hierarchy by importing our maps. So we can click here on Add Locations, and we can do it by uploading our map. So we can select where our map came from, which is either Cisco Prime Infrastructure or Cisco DNA Center, our network management solutions. Here we used Cisco Prime Infrastructure in order to create a map with our wireless network. Then we can click Upload, and we're going to click our specific map we wanted to upload, and then we'll click Finish. Then the map will successfully update. Once it shows that your map has been imported, you can just go to the main dashboard. You can click Setup, and then Map Service, and you'll be able to see exactly what map you imported into DNA Spaces. We can see that we imported this Pod 1 campus, and then the specific building, and then we can see the specific floor. So we can, on the floor, we can see the floor map and where we placed our access points. And within the maps, we can also create custom zones. So for example, this can be zone 1, and we can make this color as orange. So what's good about these custom zones will make it easier to track different customer personas or create different specific alerts based on your needs. For example, if someone enters a private conference room, you can alert them how long they're allowed to stay in that particular room. Or if too many people are in a specific area, we can send an alert to campus resources in order to address that if it's against regulations. Lastly, we'll be going over our location hierarchy. So this is our current location hierarchy. We have our building area, and then we have our floor, and then we have our specific zone that we created earlier. So the location hierarchy is super important because this is what allows us to align our IT with our businesses. This separates our different APs by region, zones, store, or brand, and it's consistent as well as is an important part in personalizing and tailoring DNA Spaces to our businesses. This is what defines our business locations and DNA Spaces. So our different applications, such as engagements, capture portals, or persona roles, are varied and defined within our location hierarchy. You can add multiple wireless locations into the location hierarchy, so this can be split into a global area or by region by region. Also, when you go into a specific building or location, you can edit the location data, and you can fill out things such as brand or country, as well as the total area of the building, as well and the occupancy limit of that specific building or area. And last but not least, you can create metadata for specific areas. So here we can go into zone 1, and we can create metadata for that specific zone. This metadata is super important to improve your granularity within your locations. So for example, maybe I'll create a value, the key would be room, and then the value is conference. So this will make it easier for you to filter throughout your different locations, throughout your different areas and your different buildings, especially when you create things like capture portals or engagements. Now we'll review what we've learned today. So we went over what the DNA Spaces connector is. It connects the wireless controller to the DNA Spaces cloud to get all those location updates. Next, we went over to connect the DNA Spaces connector into DNA Spaces using the token. Third, we went to connect the wireless controller to our DNA Spaces connector, which connects to our DNA Spaces cloud infrastructure. After that, we uploaded our maps onto DNA Spaces from Cisco Prime Infrastructure and added a zone. And lastly, we managed and adjusted our location hierarchy and added some metadata into our zones. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to click like and subscribe to our channel. We'll see you next time.